and Thomas and I will have a conversation for about an hour, and then we invite you to join the conversation. And we will, when we make the switch between this beginning and the conversation with you, with everyone, we'll speak about how we want to go about doing that to make this as much a continuous investigation as possible, because that's our goal is to have these conversations in a way that we can create an inquiry, a real inquiry between all of us. So Pawan probably doesn't know this, but he is one of the main reasons why we have a global dialogue lab. Because it was in in a conversation.
That's how it happened.
Pawan is an educator. Actually, he was originally trained as an engineer, and was living in the north of India, and began to get requests from the villagers to educate the children in the mountains where there weren't schools. So he created the Society for Integrated Development of Himalayas, and created 30 schools, 35 schools in these small hill towns.
No, there were about 17, but they were catering for about 40 kids.
Okay,
I see.
Great.
Yeah, we had children from about 40 villages.
Great. And in the process in that process, Pawan began to see much more clearly the impact of really a Western education on the fabric of connection in these villages, and on the self-esteem of the children and the families there, that having to learn completely different ways of being and thinking created. And Thomas and I went to India a few years ago in order to have a dialogue between a few of us from the West, and Pawan and a group of his colleagues and fellow educators about this core problem. I think we talked about it as sort of this juggernaut of modernity, and what it's doing to traditional cultures like those that Pawan was working with in India, and also in India at large. And it was the promise of that conversation that led us to come back to Europe and begin the Global Dialogue Lab and try to use technology as a way of trying to make connections across cultures. Because I think one of the things that really touched me in the conversation that we had in Missouri a couple of years ago was the fact that realizing that there are allies, that there are potential friends who are struggling with the same things in different places is a very, it creates a different space and hope, I think, for people who are working in situations like you've been working with, or our friend Venkatesh is working in, that when you realize that there actually is in some ways an underground or a deep root system of people who are trying to connect, who want to create a different culture, it can give all of us more hope, more inspiration, and even more practical understanding of how we might be able to work together. I don't know if you... Okay. So, Pawan, you come we've had a little bit of conversation, and Pawan just did a conversation with the integral thinker Terry Patton for our magazine here in Germany, Evolve. But you've raised some incredible questions, I think, about the impact of 500 years of Western domination on different ways of thinking, and ways of thinking that have been held for thousands of years in cultures around the world that are now struggling to know themselves because of the impact of Western modernity. And I invite you to just, sort of share with us some of what you've been thinking and questioning, and let's see where we can go from there.
Thank you, Tom and Elizabeth. I was really taken up by when you wrote to me and you mentioned something about rays of hope in a wounded world. And I was really taken up by that. And I feel, yes, the wounds are deep, but we need to understand. I mean, this problem exists both in the West and in our part of the world. But the roots may be slightly different, and the issues may be slightly different. So if you're really people who are serious about doing something about this, healing the wounds, we need to understand the deeper issues, the nuances which exist in our part of the world and your part of the world. Of course, there are common issues. Everything is not completely different. There are differences and there are commonalities. And I feel when we are talking, having a global dialogue, then we need to...
Oh, okay. Seems that we lost connection with Pawan for a moment. I hope he will come back.
And I somewhere feel that there are only two ways of bringing about a big change. One is, broadly speaking, politics, and the other is education. And I feel that people like me, at least, and I think you may agree with me, that we cannot really play a role in the kind of politics that is unfolding and that is currently reigning the world. But we can certainly do something, maybe in a small way, in the area of education. And so I feel that we can think of the various processes, the various fundamental issues that we can address through education. I don't know how we will, where we will find the space for doing it, because certainly in mainstream there is very little space, but we can definitely start something in a small way in different locations, finding people who are like-minded and who think like us, or who agree with the way we are thinking, or maybe start our own initiatives. But certainly something can be done in that area. And here I feel that, in the present world, I've started feeling I'm getting more and more convinced that this whole paradigm is based on comparison and competition. Essentially based on increasing this feeling of competition, of competitiveness especially amongst the educated. Everyone who is, quote unquote, feels that the person is educated also becomes very competitive by and large. And this is somewhere, it comes through our education system also, apart from the entire environment around us is also supporting that, I agree. But education also feeds into that. And if we can challenge that by uh, first making the individual feel the uniqueness of the individual at one level, that every individual is unique, and therefore there is it's pointless to compare one with the other, but also emphasizing on the common elements between us, which are at the intangible level. For instance, what is the essential need of a human being? Essential need, I don't mean in the materialistic sense so much, food, clothing, and shelter and stuff like that. I'm talking of the need for love. I'm talking of the need for respect. I'm talking of the need for trust. I'm talking of a need for, a feeling of gratitude. Whenever we have a feeling of gratitude, we do feel good. We don't have to feel grateful, but if we feel grateful, all of us feel good, whether from the west or from the east, from north or from south. This is the way we are designed. So if we can emphasize on these human values, which are intrinsic to human beings, they are not to be taught. They are there. They just need to be pointed out, because this is not something which comes from outside. This is already innately in us. But very few education initiatives I've seen who teach values in this way, of pointing out, what is there already in human beings. So this is one. So, what is common between us? And that at another level, we are all unique in terms of our traits, in terms of our desires, in terms of our likes and dislikes, in terms of what we get attracted to or what we get repelled by. All these may be unique to us. But this and that, by this I mean the difference, the uniqueness in us and the common between us, both go hand in hand. It is not either or, it is either and or. And that is another thing that we need to bring into our education system, because I think somewhere our education, without overtly saying things like this, is somewhere giving a sense that things have to be looked in a either or manner, not in either and or manner. And that brings me to my last point, that the way we are teaching, it's a subject-oriented teaching in most schools and colleges. And can we not have a more integrated approach, a more existential approach, if I may say so, where things are not divided into different compartments, things are already integrated, and the basic innate quality in a human being is another quality is curiosity. So we as human beings are always curious. We want to know more, and we always want to stretch the boundaries of what we know. So we always want to cross that boundary between the known and the unknown. So from the known, we want to expand the area of known and go into the unknown territory. This is all innate in us, whether we go to school or we don't go to school. Now, taking advantage of this, can we not, and what is the way a child understands is not, he doesn't naturally think in different subjects. He doesn't think in different categories. He is concerned about knowing, whatever it may be. It may be a bird, or it may be a tree, or it may be a shrub, or it may be a way to do something, solve a problem. And while doing that, he draws from different areas. He draws from whatever he knows of maths, whatever he knows of science. These are names which we have given. And he draws from these various areas and then engages with the issue at hand to satisfy his or her curiosity. So can we make education not so subject-centric, not so category-centric, and teach them that categories are made by us, by human beings. The categories are not existential. patterns are existentials, but not categories.
Mm.
So, can we make philosophy as the foundation of our education and build everything around it? Whatever we are teaching, the foundation has to be philosophy. In fact, in Sanskrit, we have a beautiful word for philosophy. We call it darshan. And darshan literally means to see. And when we say to see, we mean to see as it is, to see as it is. That means without illusions, without conditioning, without our psychological baggage, to see things as they are with an open mind. So can we bring this essential into our teaching? I think if we can do that, somewhere it'll make a difference. We have done small experiments in SID in the last 30 years, and I'm encouraged by that. I'm not saying we were 100% successful, but I've got a sense that we are getting somewhere. And I did see some difference in our students. The difference was that a certain sense of confidence in their own understanding, a certain sense of they became more relaxed with themselves. The tendency to compare with the others went down. It didn't completely go away, but it did go down to a large extent, and they accepted themselves the way they were. So I think it can be done in that area in our education. But this, for instance, when I talk about philosophy, some people get very rattled, and philosophy is something almost a taboo in certain sections of our society today. So they want something very hard and very concrete and something very this thing. And I feel that we need to be a little more tentative in our teaching. Sense of tentativeness, I find it beautiful. I find it almost poetic, For poetry is also gone out of our education system. We rely more on prose, and so I'm saying a sense of romance, a sense of poetry, a sense of tentativeness, a little bit of speculation also about things, and whatever you conclude, keep a space that you may know something more, that this too may be questionable. So, the little giving them that, if I may, I don't like the word training, but giving that kind of a training where they learn to be a little humble, a little truly humble. I'm not talking of this outward humility, which I find very false at times. I'm not talking of that. I'm not talking of manners. I'm talking of genuine humility, which modern science has actually done a lot of harm in that area. Where I feel that modern science has given an average educated person a lot of arrogance. That we know and we can know and we can know everything, and all that we know is the only thing that is correct, and anything else outside that domain is not correct, and stuff like that. So for the time being, I leave it at that. Have I made any sense, Tom?
Elizabeth? Yes, you did. But if I may come in with a question, Pawan, when we met in India, in your place, on the foothills of the Himalaya, and you and your beautiful wife told us about your experience of starting the schools in the Himalaya villages. There is something that stayed with me ever since, because I think it applies also to something like a global conversation. You said you came to these Himalayan villages with the arrogance of an urban intellectual to teach the villagers.
Yes.
And then you found out basically that the villagers had as much, at least, to teach you than you had to teach them. And there was something, I remember that very well, where you taught about the wisdom of the villages, how even how the villages are built, where the houses are in in relationship to sun and wind, how the human connection. There are thousands and thousands of years of wisdom that are organic wisdom, that are not kind of taught in an intellectual training way, but basically that they're organic experience wisdom that were achieved through just being together and out there with nature, with Indian culture for so many times. And there's something where we as Westerners, with our particular understanding of education and our worldview, just have to slow down and see that there are different perspectives and different cultures in the world, where our Western culture that is so much dominating our global environment at this point is maybe having an effect that we are not even aware of. And you were also making the point how the Indian philosophy, the Indian word for philosophy, darshan, has a different meaning than the English or German word for philosophy. And I connected that also to the fact that there's so much in traditional Indian languages, maybe Hindi, maybe different indigenous languages, maybe the traditional Sanskrit, where in the body of the language there's so much held that we talking in an English language cannot translate this because it's part of the language setting. And to understand that bringing our Western, not only modern science, but the concepts of modern science, the foundations of modern science, and even the language that is basically co-created by this scientific modernist worldview to all parts of the world has a specific effect on people, on their self-esteem, on their relationship to their own culture, on their relationship to their own roots that we are not aware of. And I think conversations like this, just meeting the different culture, is exactly what you were describing as pointing out. It's not kind of draining and understanding something, but just pointing out that that we are aware. Wait a moment, there are forms of experiences of these globalized cultures that we're experiencing right now. It may be particularly Westerners, because we are kind of the ones who bring our stuff everywhere, are completely blind to, and need to be aware of if you want to understand what's really happening and what the really effects are in our globalized culture. So I would love you to just maybe jump in with this, and because there's so much. I think that particular India has to give in this, because India has so much its own roots of its own culture and is confronted with at least 200 years of particular Indian colonization, and now of course American and post-colonization. And I would like for you to just to share what experience is this on the receiving end, and what you find particular important to see there.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought up these things. I'll take up the issue of language first. This is a major problem, I think, which we are not even recognizing. When I say we, means India is not even recognizing. And I feel that this is something that we need to recognize. I mean, I don't blame a Westerner when the Westerner is not able to recognize, because they are not exposed to this. But we Indians are exposed all the time. See, our language categories are completely different. And when I say our languages, I mean all our languages. I mean all our dialects. I'm especially pointing to Tamil. Now, Tamil is not has no connection with Sanskrit. All other Indian languages have been derived one way or the other from Sanskrit. They have a relationship with Sanskrit. So one can understand that. But Tamil has no relationship with Sanskrit. It's the older language. People say it's older than Sanskrit.
Wow.
Even Tamil has the same trait, which I'll come to in a little while. and all our dialects, even the dialects which are spoken by tribal people in India. The common thing in all our languages is that here everything happens. For instance, the way the sentence is constructed, the way the verbs are constructed, when someone gets married, in English, I don't know what you say in German, but I'm sure it must be similar. In English, we say she or he got married. In Indian languages, this is constructed as this marriage happened. Iski shadi ho gayi. It happened. The marriage happened. We don't do marriages. The marriage happens. She gave birth to a child. In our languages, the birth happened. Uske bachcha ho gaya. So the birth happened. The child happened. The marriage happened. Similarly, if I burn my hand, I don't say I burnt my hand. My hand burnt. So the sense is of it happened. There's the doingship, the doership is not there. Everything happens. In English, there's a sense of doership. In all Indian languages, the sense is that it happens. So you, as a doer, have played some role, but you are not the only person, you are not the only factor in that event unfolding. The event could be marriage, the event could be birth of a child, the event could be burning of the hand, the event could be a rainfall, the event could be anything. I could be falling down, breaking my hand. So these things in our languages, they happen, they are not done. And so I related somewhere again to the philosophy of Gita, where it is said that you can only you can do, but you don't have any right on what that doing will unfold into, the result it will give. The result is not in your right, in your control. You can do, but the result is, because it has so many other factors. You are one of the several factors which play a role in something happening, in something unfolding, in something emerging, in something manifesting. So this is a major. Yes. Yeah.
Can I ask you something about this? Because what's interesting, in that happening, though, one is not separate from the happening, right?
No.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
So one is in the happening with all that's happening. Not there's happening over there. The marriage happened over there. It's the marriage.
No.
It's you're in. You are within
you
the happening. Yeah.
Let's say there are 1,001 factors. They all have to come together for that event to happen. And you are one of those 1,001 factors. You are not the only factor. So you are part of that, but you are not the only player. There are unknown factors, there are uncertainties, all these are taking place. So uncertainty has been, I feel, embraced in our languages. The uncertainty, which is omnipresent, which is always there. It may or may not happen. You may do something with a certain intention, but that may happen, it may not happen. It is the uncertainty is lurking there all the time. So you are one of the several factors which is playing a role. Now this is, so when an Indian is coming to this and trying to relate it to the question of education, when an Indian child goes to school and he goes with the mindset that their languages, their dialects are not worth learning anymore, it is the English language which has to be learned, then what happens is that he is unaware that his psyche deep down is that he's from a happening culture. and English language is coming from a doing culture. So there is I feel it plays some kind of a disturbance in his personality.
No,
some kind of skills. Yeah.
No, I would say more than disturbance. Basically, something gets destroyed here, and I think this is something that's part of the reason why I brought it up, because it sounds kind of innocent and nice, and that we speak English all around the globe, and there is definitely an advantage to it. For example, that we can speak like this here right now, but we are not aware that any kind of language, there is deep philosophy and deep psychological, cultural patterns built in. And when, like in India culture, as you told me before, the educated class more and more loses your own languages, and basically it's kind of hip to speak English. You cannot, at least not fully, hold your own culture, your own Indianness in a different language. Yeah. So there's something happening, and it's of course not only happening in India, it's happening around the globe, that there are different ways of perceiving reality, of perceiving the world, that are, even without knowing it, just by speaking a language that we both understand as we do right now, are pushed aside. And that this is something, when we talk about global dialogue, we also have to understand that global dialogue only is really a global dialogue if the other perspective is allowed to be part of the picture. And just to see there are things, there are whole ways of perceiving that cannot be expressed in different languages in the same way, is something that people who were forced to speak a foreign language, and that language that's also coming from a completely different culture, are much more aware of than of those cultures who are basically exporting their own language and exporting their own identity.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, because I think this when you said it's much worse than it's not innocent at all. I mean, it is, and ends up being one of the deepest forms of colonialism, doesn't it? Because your categories of meaning making are alienated from the roots of your culture, or what you are indoctrinated into in terms of categories of understanding and experience end up being alien to the living fabric of culture that you have come from, and that dislocation is a kind of self-alienation, alienation that is it has a particular pain to it. I mean, I think the United States, for example, is a deeply alienated culture because it is rootless. It has no foundation, but which creates a certain dynamic and neediness and desperation in different ways. But this is different. This is that home exists, but home, you can't get home through what you're taught, through the ways that you're taught to think, even though it's present. I mean, it's
moreover, the large part of the population of the educated English class are not even aware of this. You see, they assume that languages are neutral in a way. You know, they're not aware of this conflict within themselves, and that is even more damaging. You know, because. And another problem associated with this is, you see, because when I started teaching in these village schools, then I learned that a lot of local knowledge system, the local wisdom, which is there in the small cultures in India, exists in the languages. It is embedded in the languages, in their phrases, in their idioms, in their sayings, in their stories, the folk stories which have been coming down from generations, not modern stories. You know, stories which the grandmother tells the child, and the child, I mean, you know, it comes down generations, I don't know for how long. So these stories, idioms and phrases and sayings they carry with themselves a lot of language, a lot of knowledge about health, for instance, about how to keep healthy, what to eat, what not to eat, in which season what food is good for you, in which season what food is not good for you, what you should eat in the morning and what you should not eat at night, what will give you cold, what will keep you healthy. If you are sick, then eating this is going to do this to you, etc., etc. It's a whole gamut of language out there, not just about health, not just about food, but about weather, about they can predict weather things. You know, for instance, there are sayings, I think I mentioned it last time in our conversation, Tom, with you and Terry, that there are sayings where, you know, the villager can, we were doing a project in our school. The project was on the local shrubs and vegetation and trees and shrubs. And we asked the children to go and find out a number of things from their parents, from their grandparents, what they knew about the trees, how they looked at the tree, what is the relationship between a bird and the tree, what is the relationship between water and the tree, what is where does a bird make a nest, which tree the bird does not make a nest, and stuff like that. They came back and they told us, one of the things, I'm just giving this as an example, that when the crow makes a nest in the middle of the tree, like the tree is, you know, right in the center where the leaves are, so that it's very shaded portion of the tree. If he makes the nest, the crow, and the crow makes the nest, mind you, in India, in the month of February, March, when spring starts. So because that's the only time they make the nest. And by the position of the nest, the villagers can predict whether the rainfall during the monsoons come in June and July. So it's still 3 to 4 months after the spring. And they can predict that by looking at the position of the nest, that yes, this year there's going to be good monsoon. This year it's going to be very scanty, it's going to be drought conditions, because the crow has made the nest at the top of the tree, where there are very few leaves. So they, you know, this kind of several, I can give you hundreds of such examples. This kind of knowledge exists only in the local language, because it's in their phrases, in their stories. And when the language goes away, all this traditional knowledge also goes away. And mind you, we did projects in our school to verify what they were saying. Is it true? Is there a pattern? And we came up with surprising results. You know, this is empirical knowledge. And another thing which I discovered was that most of the traditional knowledge or local knowledge, whether it was about monsoon, whether about weather conditions, whether about agriculture, what to sow, what not to sow, when to harvest, what to eat, what not to eat, how to behave, not to behave, stuff like that. All this was, they connected different aspects in nature. For instance, they connected the rainfall with the position of the crow's nest. A modern mind like yours and mine will never be able to do that unless pointed out. You see, we can connect a small child can make a connection between an electrical switch and the lighting of a lamp. He can see the connection, that when I switch it on, the light comes on. When I switch it off, the light goes off. Or when I switch on this switch, the fan comes on. When I switch it off, the fan switches off. But this is very close by. You know, it's close in space. The distance is not large. Here, unconnected things and very large spaces, they're making these kind of connections. So their mind looks at the patterns. We don't. The modern mind is very observation somewhere is lacking in our minds. The modern mind has been trained in such a way, and I again think that it's the way we are teaching, the way science is going, that has done this damage. You know, we have stopped looking at nature in a very in an innocent way, without having any prejudices. So I think, I mean, what we did at our schools, we were trying to point out that, look, your parents say this, your grandparents say, let's see if it works. Let's see if it's like this. And then we used to keep a record of where the crow's nest was in this particular year, and then match it with the rainfall that 4 months hence, stuff like that, where how the sunset looks. And, they used to say that if a western sky, when the sun is setting, if the sky's color is that like blood, like human blood, red, like the blood's color, then 9 months from that date, not according to the English calendar, but according to our traditional calendar, which is lunar calendar. It's not a solar calendar. So according to the lunar calendar, 9 months from that day, it is bound to have rain in that region. We made a record of it, and we discovered that yes, mostly it was correct, so many things like that. So the children, they started appreciating their own knowledge, their own languages. We didn't say that you must, you should. We refrained from using the word should. Should was not banned from our school, sort of, you should do this, you should not do this, that kind of a thing. But we pointed out that, look, what you collect, the knowledge which your parents have is validated. We can validate it. We can see whether it works or not. So that gave them a sense of pride in their own knowledge, in their own languages. And, that was good. So that was another thing that... another thing which, Tom, you were saying, I learned it, this was beautiful. One of the village women once told me that, your schools are ruining our children. And then she said something very fundamental. She said, don't teach them to appear in a certain way, to look in a certain way, to behave in a certain way. Teach them how to be. Don't teach them how to appear or look, but teach them to be. So the stress was on being authentic, on being in touch with themselves, and, we did that workshop on authenticity, but I think the seeds were sown by that woman there who told us that teach them to be. And this is missing in our education system. We are all the time teaching them to pretend to be someone other than who they are.
Well, you can see that would be a natural result of this overlay of a completely different world of thought and expression on top of the what has existed around them. And when you were speaking about the language categories being disrupted, or the knowledge being disrupted, that knowledge, because it's carried by relationship, it's carried by one's relationship with one's parents, one's relationship with those who are esteemed in the village, by your grandparents. That when the language is dismissed and the knowledge in the language is dismissed, you also destroy those relationships, or destroy the children's relationships with that network of family, village, and so forth. That is again another actually assault, or another wound to them as human beings, because you rip something away in that is quite again that's quite painful, and a different form of alienation. I also wanted to share a couple things with you that I think are very, there are scientists and researchers who are trying to bring to light some of the things that we're talking about. And I remember there was a study that one of the famous researchers who studied the creation of how in the West categories were created, and how they're created in the mind. How does the Western mind create categories? How does that happen in human development? so they very simple experiment. They would take like little figures of people and horses, little houses and families, and they would put them on a table, all these little like toys, and say, put them together. And very young children would put the people in the house and would put the rider on the horse. But by the age of 7 or 8, the children knew that that wasn't the right answer. That when they say put things together, that what that means is all the horses go together, all the riders go together, the houses go together, and the families go together. So the natural sense of what goes with what, by the age of 7 or 8, in the ways the categories are taught in the West, is already disrupted. And they also found that people over the age of 70, when they asked them to do the same thing, they went back to the kind of making the kind of story scene rather than the categories, which I thought was also very interesting. But it points to that there is a way of thinking that is brought in the education system in the West that takes these things that are, as you were calling it, a more natural or innocent way of looking at nature, but it's also a related way of looking at nature. It pulls that apart.
Yes. Yes, true. I mean, I'm reminded of, how, what you say is very interesting, and I absolutely think that must be the way you are describing it. I was reading about an experiment, and I think I should bring that into this conversation. This was done in some American university a long time ago, but I really like that. That it's such a beautiful small experiment. How?
How?
Languages impact. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, you just blinked out for just a second. You said
how languages impact our thinking. And so what they did was, I believe that like in English, when we have a fairly conversation we say we had a conversation for a long time. We had a long chat. So what we are doing is that we are converting the dimension of time into dimension of length. Long, right? That's how we speak in English. Time is converted into a dimension of length. In Russian, I believe, I don't know Russian, but according to that, what I read, in Russia, they convert the unit of time into unit of weight. So if they have a conversation for a long period, they say, oh, we had something to do with heaviness. It becomes a heavy conversation. So this experiment was very simple. They put these English-speaking people in one room, and they projected a small line, a one-dimensional line on the screen for, let's say, 1 second. And then they projected a very large, long line for 1 second. And they asked the English-speaking crowd in the audience which line stayed longer on the screen. And most of them said the longer line stayed longer, even though they'd stayed for exactly the same amount of time. Then they asked the same question to Russian-speaking crowd, and the answer was different. They said about the same. They didn't feel that the longer line stayed longer. Now they reversed the experiment, and they put a very light object for 1 second and a heavy object for the same amount of time, with both the English crowd and the Russian crowd. And this time the Russian-speaking people said the heavier stuff stayed longer on the screen. So, it's because the mind associates weight with time. So they look at when they see that, they also, immediately association is of that. So I think this runs deeper. If we think in a certain language, our perceptions are also molded by that language. This issue also needs to be, I mean, this can open many doors about the dominating language, how it is changing our perceptions and alienating us from the way we have been looking at things. There is no right and wrong here. It's just the way you look at nature, at relationships, at people around you. You know, if you come from a certain culture and if you come from a different culture, you see it in a different way. So this is not to say that this is a superior way of seeing or this is an inferior way of seeing, but showing that, you know, these are all different ways of seeing, and some people look at it like this and some people look at it like this. Now, these are many things which I think if you can bring in the school, then this will bring different cultures, bring different perspectives on par, you know, rather than one thing dominating the rest.
Yeah, I think that is exactly the point. And that's part of the reason why I'm happy we are having this conversation. Because to put it simply, colonization goes much deeper than we think. Usually, colonization, that's all true. There's economical colonization, there's political colonization, but then we even can talk about Western ideology and modernism. I think people would agree on that. But the simple fact that Western languages, the use of Western language is a colonizing factor.
Yes.
I think that's something that's really in the shadow at this point. That
Absolutely.
It's just the fact that that we are talking using mostly English right now in a Western language that's completely embedded and grown by Western history, and that we force this language on each other. And I also, just to be straight, I don't know the answer, because there's something where it also makes complete sense. We are living in one world and we need a kind of a second language to communicate with each other. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because it definitely helps us to have this conversation right now. If we would, I'm not a native English speaker. You're not a native English speaker. We are using English. Otherwise, it would be difficult right now to have this conversation. So I'm grateful for that. But at the same time, I think it's an important step to just be aware. That's here we are coming back to the pointing out. Just to the pointing out that there's something going on that really has an impact, and that what we are talking about, to allow different cultures to be on par, on par. If we want that, we have to be aware of the structural differences in communication in order to just have a starting point for this. And as I said at the beginning, this is much more obvious in the global south than it is in the global north, because we are basically exporting our structures, you are importing our structures. There was also something in the other conversation we had a couple of weeks ago that struck me very much, which has to do with the Western scientific worldview, and where you were bringing the example of an everyday modern Indian, not necessarily an university education level, but just usual high school education level, who is so basically in some way religiously embedded in Western scientific thinking, that his or her relationship to the villagers' thinking, quote unquote, is one of complete superiority, because he basically thinks what this dumb villagers, or what you just describing before, is just pure superstition. And because of the political structure, of course, of the power structures in the world, there is an embedded feeling of inferiority in this, built in the structure, that at least we have to look at in order to understand what we are doing to these cultures, like the Indian cultures and most of the southern cultures, and see a way, if we want to start a global dialogue, we have to find ways beyond that. I don't know how this can look like. We have to see how this can look like. But if we're really serious to have a global conversation, a global dialogue, we have to find ways to go beyond this, because otherwise it's just a dominating dialogue. It's not a dialogue. It's basically a one-way conversation, really.
I think I think it's important what you're saying, Thomas, and I'm actually heartened by conversations like with you, Pawan, and conversation that we had a little while ago with Pai Villaratsa from the Philippines, people who are working within their own context to raise up these questions, and also to work to find ways to kind of honor and create parity of view, from be able to see eye to eye, but it requires a real capacity for self-reflection and an understanding of one's culture in a particular, in a very big context, in order to be able to do that. And that's the kind of education that I think is really important now, for so that and that's even amongst people like us, to be able to be able, and still it has to be translated into a language that we all can understand, which makes it so difficult. But to recognize that there are forms of consciousness, forms of mind, categories of thinking that reveal the world and revealed reality being humanness in profoundly with different degrees of subtlety and in different ways. And that even though, as you said at the beginning, there are these ways that we all can experience humanness in similar ways, that, I know what I wanted to say, that the fact of this inferiority and that has happened as a result of the domination of the West, a result of that, because that is so pervasive in the world. We're not going to get to a positive politics without dealing with this, because without really recognizing and really being able to lift up and honor the ways of knowing and the ways of being and understanding and the wisdom that is held in different contexts, we're not going to be able to have political solutions that are going to create the kind of parity and mutual respect that will be needed to create a viable global reality. Pawan.
Oh. Pawan,
you are muted. You are.
Try to unmute you, but I'm not able to.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well, what I was saying is that, you mentioned self-reflection. I would just add two more things: sensitivity and authenticity. If that can be the common ground between, people trying to understand each other and appreciate each other, these are three essential ingredients, and how do we cultivate this? How do we cultivate the tendency for self-reflection, to being sensitive to oneself and the other, and being authentic? And they are related. They are not unrelated. They are not in isolation. They are all interconnected. If this can be somehow cultivated, I think what we are talking about it can give a some encouragement to that kind of thing emerging.
Great.
Now, of course, one has to apply. We can share our thoughts and write something about it and share with each other, and then see what happens with that.
Okay. Then I'd like to with that question that you just raised, which is how can we create a context of self-reflection, authenticity, and sensitivity that can allow this kind of conversation to happen. I would like to invite everyone to turn their cameras on and join the conversation, and then we'll speak about that. We had a number of people drop off, so we've got a very small group. But great, good. Okay, Susan, there's a light right behind your head that is that's kind of flashing in all of our faces. Yeah, great, good. Great. And Tony? Tony, did you get Tony? Okay. All right. Now I'd like to start this section of our dialogue by just slowing down for a minute and to come together in being here together, and let's take a few minutes, just a few minutes to meditate briefly. Just, you can close your eyes or look down at the floor, and let's allow what has been said to enter our being, not just our minds, and be present here now. And in our being present, I would like to make present to us the fact that we, as this small group, form a network across our planet. We have Pawan in India. Some of us are in Germany. Some in North America, Hawaii. And here we are, spanning this space. Okay, simple, just that much. Okay, and now what I would like is, can we continue this conversation as a conversation amongst all of us? Can we share this inquiry together that the three of us have opened up, and that ended with Pawan's question about how can we create context, or what will it take to create this kind of capacity for dialogue, for that allows us to come together. And you mentioned self-reflection, authenticity, and sensitivity.
What occurs to me, first of all, just thank you so much. This conversation struck me as being very real, very full, in a way that it touched on things and validated things that are often not validated. in my world. So thank you so much for I have a new excitement around possibility in education. So back to the question, what I was hearing in the conversation was how the Western world, through its language and through the culture embedded in the culture, is this a sort of comfortableness in the material outer doing world. So materialism, science, and doing is very prominent and very rewarded. And the inner world, the world of values and beliefs and being is less valued, or at least in the world that I live in. So all the qualities of self-reflection, sensitivity, authenticity, these seem to me to be about the validating the inner experience where things happen. Things happen in the material world also, but we experience them through the inner world. So what occurs to me is it would have to do with more emphasis on being and less emphasis on doing. So I'm just noticing how many of my friends are always so busy doing. It seems like some kind of an epidemic of doing. So I think just drawing attention to being and there's something about connection. There's so many things in here that I'll just put that out to start now, but it seems like an emphasis on the inner away from the material.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And doing it together.
Pawan, you're welcome to respond if you'd like to keep the conversation going.
No, I'll come in. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, let others respond who were there in the conversation.
Okay.
I'll definitely come in. Yeah.
Okay, then to me that
yes, Susan.
You know, asking the question, how do we cultivate context or tendency for self-reflection, authenticity, and sensitivity? That how we're even asking the question, because we got the how do we. I mean, immediately I was wanting to have a thing to do with the way that question's asked, and maybe one of the things that we need to do is examine how we're asking the question.
Great. Good. Julia, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things to say, but then I would talk for a long time. And I would say what we do right now, what we have done right now is already the first thing, I think, and also what you have planned on the 2nd and 3rd of December, that we can dissolve the situation with the general English world language by going through other levels of communication, like common meditation and these kind of things, because then we communicate on a completely other level. Yeah, I know for the other situations where we want to exchange information, like now, we need other possibilities, of course, and maybe it would be a solution to have a symposium or a very big conference where we would invite all kind of people from indigenous background, and then just pardon?
I think go ahead. Go ahead.
And then start with kind of whatever ritual or meditation which is suitable or which seems to be good for everybody, and then after just say, okay, this is the situation. What do you need? How can we proceed further? And then make a common project out of it. And I personally think that we need another world language in the next dictionaries. And that would be a big project. And if I can say something, I have just to explain, very often I have ideas which are very far, and sometimes it seems a little bit strange, but maybe we could work together with people who are busy with dolphins, because I don't know if you know that dolphins have an advanced language, and that can really, I mean, this is the question if that's what we want, if there's an object and they really can describe the object and everybody has exact the same information without any kind of different, I don't know the word in English.
Auf Deutsch.
Färbung. What is that? If Einfärbung, yeah, no, there's no
different color.
Yeah, but it's not
coloring.
And a kind of judgment or something. There's not personal judgment in it. It's just the pure information. And then they just spread the information, and everybody has the information, and there's no conflict about it because of the individual, something like that. And I think that is a very advanced state of human beings if they can develop this kind of language. Maybe we are able to do that in the next years. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because that there is something called there is the experience of direct perception that is but it's not usually information based in a certain kind of way. And I wonder if information brought into language is always somehow biased by its nature. That's part of it's something that we have to live with. Yeah, feel free, Tony. Oh, you're muted. Hang on. We can't hear you. Oh, we can't hear you. It's on your side. You're on. Yeah.
No, we cannot hear you. And something with your mic or with your computer, because from the system you're not muted. So it must be either your microphone or your computer settings, or the connection between them. We can see you speaking, but we cannot hear you speaking. Okay. And maybe just in between, to say something also to you, Julia. What I find interesting about these conversations like this right now, and I'm wondering if you agree with that, that part of what's happening here is, of course, the exchange of information, and to hear Pawan speaking and to hear from a different perspective. But there's something which I find very powerful, which is beyond, or even before, you can say before language. It's the simple fact of being exposed to each other. That there's something about exposure that is a form of communication itself. I could hear the same amount of information what Pawan was sharing with us about his education background in India, and read it in a book or watch a documentary, and that's all great and it's all fantastic. But there's something to be face-to-face, even via screen, face-to-face, with the other human being and with the other culture through the other human being, that forces us to let go of something that I find has a power on its own.
Well, also something opens up in that. Something opens up in that letting go, that we're together, in that difference, in the recognition of the coloring in a positive sense.
And Tony, if you want,
there we go.
That sounds like a sound.
Yeah, that sounds like you.
No. No, it wasn't. I just wanted to say, maybe you also want to type it. If you want to type what you want to say into the chat window, and we all can read what you wanted to say.
Okay. Gila, did you want to share something?
Yes, I want to share something. For me, it's the first time that I be in such a room because I want to learn English. I recognize that there want something grow. And I thought I'm only the one who don't understand
English.
The other person, because my English isn't perfect. And now I recognize we are all at the same point. Because there is the culture, it's another culture. We are all in another culture, and I thought I must learn English, and then I can speak with the other people from another culture. And now I recognize that but I think it's a good point because it is not theory, but it's life now.
Thanks for your message, Tony. I don't know if everyone can see Tony's message.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
I didn't know that about the Irish language. That's interesting.
Can you give some examples?
So it's the oldest still spoken language in Europe. Irish language and Sanskrit have a lot in common.
Oh, yeah.
I see. Go right, mile, I guess.
Which means? Irish, Greek, and Latin were the first 3 European languages to develop a written literature. And Irish is the oldest, I guess.
Sounds like. There's something interesting also in the experience of this conversation, and I would like all of you, but also particularly Pawan, to ask you, because again and again when we talk about this, I feel that I'm looking forward to find an answer to this? So how can we overcome this? How can we heal this? And then I see myself that I don't want to go there. I just it feels wrong to look for the quick fix or something like this. It seems right now that the real thing to go is just to expose oneself to the reality of it without having a solution right now. I'm not sure. I'm just sharing my response, and it may be right, maybe wrong, but it feels wrong to look for a solution because I feel I have to be more exposed to the reality before it's even fair or even right to look for solutions here, because to be exposed is the thing that has to happen first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tony, if we think we have solutions, then that'll be arrogance. But I don't think we can think in those terms. But yeah, certain experiments maybe, and as you said, expose ourselves and also learn, be ready to learn, pick up things, and keep on, trying, experimenting a little bit. And I think right now you can't do it at a very large scale, these kind of things. It has to be in small groups. The groups can be at the global level or at the local level with different groups. Starting these small little spaces where we can have some good, authentic dialogue, where there's a lot of empathy there, a mutual respect for each other. And as I said, a certain tentativeness. By that I mean not being very sure of what we are hearing. When I hear you, I should have a space open that maybe I've not, there's more to it, kind of a thing. Or I have not fully understood the other, that kind of a thing. These spaces are so important, and we need to keep on working to create them. So that's something that we could do. It's not in terms of finding a solution, but in terms of creating an environment where solutions may, at a future date, emerge. Where that kind of a thing. So that is important. And that, I think I've been trying to do it here in India. I've not been very successful. Yes, some success has been there of getting people together and without having a very firm agenda of what we are going to discuss. We still discuss. The only not condition, but only request is that let's be authentic in whatever we are sharing. And let's try and listen to the other. Let's not jump at what we hear, but let's listen to the other. And when I say listen to the other is that trying to understand listen to the other person's meaning. We hear the word all the time, but what is the meaning behind the word? Making that effort. That is, I think, in today's world very important, because we are moving so fast that we don't have the time to listen. We only hear. We don't have the time to sit without an agenda, any agenda. Just sit and have a good conversation, a good, authentic, easy conversation, where you have the feeling that you are not being judged by the other, where you are not pretending and you don't have to pretend. You are very relaxed. I think that itself will create a rich environment, and maybe something will come out of that. Pace is also very important. I mean, we somehow that got missed out of our conversation, but this very fast pace somewhere is not very conducive to seeing things as they are. I was reading somewhere that if you move in a car at a very fast rate, your vision narrows down. the faster the speed, your eyes see the angle at which the eye sees, the faster you go, it narrows. The slower you go, the vision becomes larger. I mean, the angle of vision. It's never 180 degrees, but it's close to 180 degrees when you're sitting at one place. As soon as you start moving and the speed becomes more, it starts from 150 to 140 to, it keeps narrowing down. I think it's the same with the mind, I mean, the faster we think, the faster we are. If we are very much in a hurry, then we are not able to see everything. We are not able to appreciate many things. So I think this is something, these are some of the things that we can work around, keeping things in mind if they make sense to us, not as a value system or anything like that. We contemplate on these things. If they make sense, then bring them into our, what should I say? I mean, the context is created in our conversation like that, and we keep on trying to make these spaces available. And the thing is that how can I be, my issue today is that how can I be comfortable with myself, being an ordinary person? Why do I have to be someone special to feel good about myself? Why can't I feel good about myself by being very ordinary? By that, I don't mean pretending to be ordinary. I mean, because, where this came from was that when the more I see people, I find that people who've never been to, who are not educated, who lead a very simple life, I find that they are far more relaxed. I find that they are far more comfortable, not just with themselves, but with their surroundings. They are not pretentious. They are more authentic. They are more cooperative. Their value systems are more intact than mine. So that is the ordinary person here. They still exist in a large number, but their spaces are getting squeezed out. They don't have any spaces where they can be. Even ordinary things. For instance, I mean, I went to my village, and everyone used to play football there. It was a good sport there. Everyone used to play. I mean, there were so many grounds where people would play football. And I went there after a number of years, and I wanted to know where is a good football game going on. And people told me, no one plays football anymore. I said, why? So 2 reasons: that the television has come, so everyone is stuck to television or these kind of games, and there are no more grounds anymore. Buildings have come. So there are no spaces, both physically and mental space, where you can do ordinary things. The whole environment is pushing you you can go to an academy to learn football. You can go to a sports academy to learn football. But just an ordinary game where there's, just to play for fun is missing. So that kind of a thing, I think we can work towards recreating that kind of a thing, recreating that kind of a life. I mean, this needs to be explored more, maybe need to be thought about more. This is my initial feeling, which I'm sharing with you. That
I agree, but also recreating this kind of life between us, because something what you said about this slowing down, I very much relate to a conversation like this.
Yes.
Because one of my experience, and it's just my experience, but it seems to me be significant for me, is by talking with you and talking from people with different perspectives, I feel being exposed, whatever that means, to your being, even via screen. And it's kind of an odd thing because we're not even sitting in the same physical room. But there's something that the language seems to be right to put it that way, that I'm exposed to your being, and that does something, being exposed to each other in that even I cannot really recollect on a cognitive level what this means, but it seems to be significant to be together in a way and spend time. And it does something in the way I experience the world, because also being with you, it's you as a person, but the whole world spaces together here meeting. It's we are also our cultural background, and there is a being where just allowing this to be part of our shared space. I have the feeling that something comes out of it. I don't know what it is, but to do this, to practice, seems to be important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a sense that and maybe this is sort of in the time scale that Tony was referring to, maybe 7 generations, but that there's something about that simply being together in an ordinary way for conversations without agenda, but looking to meet, actually, looking to really meet. That being the agenda, can we really meet? But without that being a thing, without turning that into some kind of thing. But that there's that there's a learning that feels like that can take place in the humanness that's between us, and the humanness that we share somehow. That it's not that something is being educated or understood at a different level of what it means to be human. That feels to me important, and I don't know why, but important and beyond myself, but important in terms of our being human together on this planet.
Yeah. No, it's important. And I really think that we should get together once again soon, in India.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, that's when without, for some time, for 5-6 days, maybe a week. That'd be good.
Yeah. Well, I think right now let's allow anyone who wants to continue to have a conversation together. And I'm sorry, Tony, you're writing all kinds of fascinating things, and I will make sure that we publish this with the video so that people here can connect to your contribution. But sorry, it's hard to weave it in as we're going. But now I think to have a breakout group. And Pawan, Thomas, and I will leave, and anyone who wants to stay to continue talking and continue exploring these questions. And I think really we're kind of on a trajectory here to just continue that trajectory. Would you say anything different?
Maybe to repeat Pawan's question.
Yeah, and actually to take into well, I think it's kind of more what does it need from us as human beings to be able to come together and create these kinds of spaces? What do we need to cultivate in ourselves for that to be able to create spaces without agenda of ordinariness, where a deeper humanness can be met in each other. And so we'll invite you into a breakout room, and please let us know where you went with your conversation. You can write about that on the Global Dialogue Lab page or in Facebook. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye. And thank you, Tom and Elizabeth.
Just stay with us for just 1 minute, Pawan.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hello.
So,